Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Eben Harrell. I'm a senior editor at Harvard Business Review. And we're here, in a sense, to celebrate the legacy of a great figure in American business. Malcolm Baldrige was the Secretary of Commerce in 1981. He was in office at a time when the US economy was taking a hit globally, particularly from Japanese competitors. Corporate America was inefficient, its products were defective, and every kid in America, especially this kid, was begging mom and dad for a Sony Walkman. So Baldrige, with the help of management gurus and experts, established a comprehensive framework for managerial excellence and challenged organizations to an award for particular high achievers. The Baldrige National Quality Award has become the highest recognition of business performance excellence for both public and private US organizations given by the President of the United States. So in this age of disruption and move fast and break things, why does quality still matter? Well, from a consumer perspective, we still rely on the fact that our plane won't crash, our Takata airbag won't explode in our face, the surgeon won't accidentally kill us on the operating table, and above all, at least for my mother-in-law, the darn TV clicker will work. But from a leadership perspective, there's never been more scrutiny on your goods and services. There are expert opinions from the likes of J.D. Power and Consumer Reports, but also now non-expert voices like social media and peer review sites. If your goods and services aren't up to scratch, you will be punished, and no amount of shoeshine, strategy, or marketing wizardry will make up for it. So I'm on stage with an elite group. As of 2015, 102 organizations nationwide have been presented with the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. 4 of these businesses are right here on the front range, and we are fortunate enough to have leaders from these winners here with us today, along with a representative from a regional award recipient. We're here to learn the best practices from them about quality management. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Sharon Kleinbell is Professor of Management at the Monfort College of Business at the University of Northern Colorado, which received the Baldrige in 2004. She's also a Baldrige examiner. Kevin Unger is CEO at Poudre Valley Health System, an entity within Colorado Health, a Baldrige winner in 2008. Jerry Agnes is president and CEO at Elevations Credit Union, which won the award in 2014. And if you live in Boulder County and have a mortgage, chances are you know Elevations well. Darren Attaby is the city manager at City of Fort Collins, which was a REMPEX winner, the regional award in 2014. And Jeff Jones is director of quality at CH2M, an environmental engineering company, which won the award in 2000. I've placed him as far away as possible because he's been threatening to heckle me. So Baldrige is a framework for overall performance management across all units. At a hospital, that could be about reducing fall rates or improving revenue cycle management. When you're launching a quality initiative, how do you pick where to start and what to focus on? And do you try to get marginal gains in everything at once or big jumps in a few things?
That's a great question, Evan, and one that I think we learned a lot from. So the very first year that we kind of embarked and submitted an application to Baldrige, we got our feedback report. We thought we were really good and that we would automatically be a recipient. We actually scored in the 20th percentile, which is not very good. And so we received about, I think, 76 opportunities for improvement. We tried to work on all of them. We resubmitted the next year, and we scored in the 10th percentile the second time that we applied, until we finally realized that you really have to focus. And so what we ended up doing is taking really 2 major systemic initiatives from each of the categories and focused on that for the year. And so we decided that we wanted to take the workhorse versus racehorse approach towards process improvement. So every year we got incrementally better, and we started seeing our scores improve, but it wasn't until we really focused down on key initiatives that we started to drive improvement. We had easier areas than others to do it. Lab, very process focused, and so we had good success in the lab. Revenue cycles were areas that we were able to improve upon. Those process areas were the ones that, Lean and some of these other process improvement tools were very effective right out of the chutes. We saw improvement and then gained momentum from there.
Great. I have 5 or 6 follow-up questions, but I want to get everyone out of the blocks first. This is a question for Darren. So I'm a dual national. I have an English passport, and my compatriots just voted to sever themselves from the European Union. There's a huge mistrust of institutions, and governments all over the world. And you've spoken to me a little bit about how quality management can play a role in that. Can you discuss that a little bit and what you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for being here and for letting Fort Collins be at this table, because we're mid-course. We're a regional recipient, and it's a real privilege to be here. You know, I think that, and what we talked about was this idea of a trust us model versus moving towards an outcome-based or results-driven model. That the way I look at the relationship that local government oftentimes has with their citizenry is a more of a, you tell us what your, where's your pothole, what's your problems, thank you very much, we'll fix it, and now go away. And then we were going through some major downsizing in around 2010 or so, and our citizens started saying, that doesn't work for us. This trust us kind of model, you give us your fees, taxes, fines, and charges, trust us, we'll deliver a good local government, wasn't working. They were asking hard questions. When we were talking about closing down parks and swimming pools and things like that, they said, whoa, we want to know, are you efficient? Are you effective? Those sorts of things. So we needed an approach to be more systematic at this. And I believe now that we can not only say we are striving for performance excellence, we're on this journey, but we can actually show through data the results. And what I'm most proud of in Fort Collins is the needle's moving. As a result of this journey, our needle is moving. In other words, our productivity, our workforce engagement, our citizens are, in many different ways, have said to us they're the most satisfied citizens in America. So I think that the old trust us model doesn't work as it relates to local government in particular.
Right. I think trust is a topic that we're going to discuss both for consumers, customers, but also for staff as well. One of the things that strikes me about a common thread, we're seeing already is, Baldrige launching this initiative, when Japanese competitors were stealing share, you guys understanding the importance of transparency at a time of cuts and austerity. There's this kind of idea of, not letting a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And actually, Jerry, that's my next question for you, because you have a rather extraordinary history at Elevations. You came in 2008, I believe, on the verge of a huge credit crisis, and you've just been appointed a CEO of a credit union. So take us back to that, and at that sort of time when the world is burning all around you, what led you to Baldrige and...
Well, thank you for that. It was an extraordinary time. I arrived at Elevations Credit Union a month before Lehman Brothers, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac were concerned. It was a difficult time for the financial markets. And we were looking for a framework that would help us not only endure but thrive during that very difficult time. And in April of 2009, our board of directors declared that we're going to seek the National Quality Award, Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. And it was this huge statement for an organization of our size. We're a small, nonprofit financial cooperative competing against very strong, formidable competitors, money center banks and regional competitors. And for us, that framework really worked. To put it in perspective, it took us 55 years to accumulate $63 million of capital. And capital for a financial institution is king. The next 5 years during the Great Recession, we doubled that capital. So it was an extraordinary time for our organization. And you mentioned mortgages, and that was a big part of that. When I arrived, we were an irrelevant mortgage lender. And today we're the #1 mortgage lender in our primary market, beating the #1 and #2 residential lenders across the nation 2 and 3 to 1. So it really put the framework in place for us that gave us a lot of great results.
Well, there's one part of that I wanted to tease out just quickly. You said that the board decided to launch this. Obviously, a big strategic decision like this is the board. But was it their idea?
Well, we talked about it actually during the interview process. And they liked it so much that they hired me, and it became the idea of the organization. I brought the concept to the organization, but I want to be very clear. It was a total organizational effort. And a lot of education had to occur for a long time. I arrived in August of 2008. We didn't make that declaration until April of 2009. And importantly, we used a Baldrige coach, Jan Johnston, who's here this morning, to help educate our board and our leadership team to get our minds around what are we about to embark upon, because it is a cultural changing, DNA changing event for an organization.
And not to put you on the spot, but can you give us the elevator pitch then?
Well, for us, it was about flipping the script from how are we organized for ourselves to serving our members and what value do we bring to them. And so for us, our organizational chart is built around our members, which really began to break down the silos in the organization and brought great transparency and interdependency to each other. And we began working together solely for the benefit of our members, and they have been blessed ever since.
Right. Yeah, from what I know about quality management and the different frameworks that are out there, transparency and just sort of having a window into what's actually going on in your organization, particularly at the front line with customers, is one of the most important things. So, Sharon, it's been said that the faculty of a university, and I love this quote, is, quote, a bunch of entrepreneurs held together by a common grievance over parking. What are some of the challenges of launching a quality program with such a workforce? And two-part question, how do you define quality in an educational setting?
Well, our quality journey really began in 1984 when a series of strategic decisions were made to tighten the focus of our program and really focus on quality. And to accomplish that, they had a hiring plan where they hired quite a few new doctorally qualified faculty, and I'm one of them. And during the hiring process, that vision was communicated very clearly to us that, we are looking to be, the best undergraduate business program in the state of Colorado, and you're being brought on board to, to help us with that. So you had the committed core of faculty who made the strategic decisions in the first place. You had quite a few new hires that were brought in with that vision in place and clearly communicated to them. And so a national benchmarking study had us #1 in the country of the participants in faculty with a common vision. So all this was pre-Baldrige. Once we got into Baldrige, then that was relatively easy because the hard work had been done in setting the culture. So I think if the culture is there, now even if you don't have the perhaps luxury of almost hiring a third of your faculty new, I think the thing that you can do is just work on the culture. And as long as faculty understand that there's something other than parking, which is a problem, that it is a, what does it do for you? And I think as long as you explain that to them, I think that it could be done very easily. And then the second part was how do we measure quality? And we have some key performance indicators, like I'm sure most of you do. And the big thing is student performance and satisfaction. Those are the two things that we really measure. But we also look at faculty satisfaction. We look at quality of new recruits. So we have various other things, but our core ones are around student satisfaction and student performance.
Jeff, another question about workforce. So quality and efficiency. You trace it all the way back to Taylorism. This idea of management by stopwatch. Watching men load objects onto trucks, etc. But today, I think there's a recognition, Board of Kaizen and other Japanese management insights, that the workforce needs to be empowered and have a certain amount of autonomy in setting improvements. CAH2M has a distributed workforce and a culture that says employees are, quote, paid to think, probably out of necessity. Can you talk a little bit about your experience between centralized and local control when it comes to quality among a dispersed workforce?
Sure. Yeah, for us, I think that's one of our toughest challenges, is when you look at most of the Baldrige recipients, they'll be in 1 or 2 locations or at least in the same state, and we've got people throughout the country at a bunch of different facilities like major breweries or major automotive manufacturers that probably a lot of you are driving their cars, or water and wastewater plants. We do public works departments for like the city of Centennial. We're running their city operations. And so really for us, that consistency of from the boardroom to the shop floor is such a challenge because they're not even in the same state. And so we kind of have a 3-tiered approach to it. Kind of, you've heard of the Toyota paradox of top down and bottom up type of a thing. For our top down, we do the same strategic planning that a lot of you do, right? Our customers.
Why don't you take a moment? I mean, obviously I've heard of the Toyota paradox, but maybe some in the audience haven't. Maybe you can describe that.
Well, so you kind of have to have your strategic initiatives that are pushed down through the top, right? But then you have to have that frontline worker who's empowered, like their lean efforts, right? With the A3, which is one piece of paper of, hey, find something to improve, come up with a small tiger team, and let's tackle this fast. We kind of have to do that same model. So that's what we do. We do it three ways. Is at the top down, we do the same strategic planning that most of these people in here probably do. Customer driven, right? And then we focus a lot on leadership, and Jerry and I spoke a lot about that last night at dinner, that without really engaging effective leaders, all of this is kind of moot. So that's our second tier, is focusing on our leaders. And then third, and Adam Cohen's here, he could speak to this. He's a consultant who's excellent at this, but we have what we call quality coaches. And they're peer coaches that are upskilled in these areas, and they go around from location to location, and because they're a peer, they're not speaking down to the team there, they're speaking straight across. So it's at my facility, at my brewery, this is what we have faced that can relate to your, like we run the Atlanta airport. This is how we do the brewery, but you can do this at your airport. And it's more comfortable because it's peer-to-peer coaching. So those are kind of our three ways that we get a distributed workforce on the same page. Is strategic initiatives at the top, a lot of leadership investment. We've got 30 people in my office today waiting for us to do leadership training this afternoon, and then quality coaching at the site level.
You know, Jeff was telling me last night about some work he did in Iraq, and about how the difficulties culturally in an environment of fear empowering your workers. And that's something that you guys strive for, right? Is this sense of providing a safe environment for people to point out needs for process improvement.
Nothing is new, right? That's a Deming thing from his points. His top one was drive fear out of the organization, and that's 1940s. But it's absolutely relevant, right? If you have people who are terrified to take a risk or make a decision, or we've heard it called fail forward, if they're afraid to fail, they'll never give you their best ideas. So we tell them you're paid to think. You know, anybody can turn a wrench. You're paid to turn it smarter or find a way to avoid turning it if we can.
Jerry, so what about that from your perspective as a new CEO? You've come in and now suddenly you're asking a lot of tough questions of your organization. You know, how as a leader did you foster an environment in which you could get honest answers for those questions?
Yeah, that's really important. At the end of the day, I think employees want to be seen, heard, and valued. And so being able to create an environment where you're asking those important questions that are salient for our membership and our employees and our community, and then striving to get those honest answers. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And I think it's important for leadership to create an environment, a safe environment for that to happen. In fact, you know, at the end of my career, I'll be evaluated on capital accumulation, member satisfaction, employee satisfaction. But for me, it's about creating that safe environment. Because if I accomplish that as a leader, then I know we can have those brutally honest conversations that impact the organization. And so for employees to, I think, get the value out of that is to be able to express something, and for leadership to listen and to act upon it. And so for us, it was those early actions that we took upon their council, and they started seeing the positive momentum that we gained from their recommendations, and it just opened up a floodgate of improvement possibilities.
Darren, was there at Fort Collins was that effort to try and foster, you know, drive fear from the organization, was that complicated at all in sort of a political setting when you have political and elected leaders at the top?
Yeah, I think so. I guess I would characterize local government employees as, it feels like a little more democratic sort of environment. It's not, first of all, when I became city manager, I feel like I inherited a very strong culture. But I don't think it was a culture about performance excellence. I think it was more lots of good initiatives and things going on. And I think what Baldrige has done for us is help us become crystal clear about world-class municipal services. We talk a lot about our stop doing list as well. And I don't think a lot of governments talk about that. We talk about what we need to do, what we need to, new initiatives, and take on more and more and more, because our citizens are more and more demanding, and I am as well as a resident of Fort Collins. But I think this idea of really prioritizing, and But as Jeff said, I mean, I think that there's so much value from our coworkers from the bottom up, and I've actually found that I think that the leaders have to model. I mean, I think, you know, to use Jack Welch's some of Jack Welch's terms, if we're not asking the hard questions, no one is. But to create an environment where it's not a gotcha when you're asking hard questions. You're asking hard questions to improve. And I think as a leader, as we're modeling that, and then when a coworker in the wastewater plant asks me a hard question, I want to encourage that. I don't want there to be difficult ramifications. Like, you know, we don't. So, you know, another thing I think that's very, very important is that, you know, everyone's heard the quote, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? We've heard that. I actually think it's both. I think if you have an organization with a strong culture and no strategy, you know, everyone's bringing their dogs to work and getting nothing done. I really believe that. If you have all strategy and no culture, you're suboptimal, and people aren't loving their work and getting goosebumps about their work. But what I think that if you dig into these organizations, what you find is organizations that have incredible cultures and incredible strategies, chances are they're going to have great results. I was talking with Bruce Page, who owns Manus Machine in Fort Collins, and you know, I think that we were talking about that an organization full of competent, dedicated, capable people does not guarantee great results. Right? And so for us, this journey at the City of Fort Collins of performance excellence has, I think it's given us some great structure and really helped us prioritize. But for me, the big takeaway, I hope people, I think I can really speak to Fort Collins and say it's about culture and it's about strategy. And I think our odds are much better at creating greater results than thinking it's going to happen organically or just naturally with great, competent people. I think the systems are critical. Without the systems, you're not going to be optimized.
Yeah. Kevin, are there challenges in a clinical setting and a medical setting because of the looming threat of litigation and fear? You know, doctors are scared of getting sued for malpractice. I mean, that's just part of the reality that they deal with. So how do you banish that when you're trying to improve quality in the clinical setting?
Well, you know, it's really all about the patient care. So keeping that focus on patients is key throughout. We try to create a just culture. So 99% of the time, it's a process issue that's broken is the reason that it led us to a mistake that occurred. And then we want to dive into root cause analysis and make sure that doesn't happen again. And so when your workforce and your physicians see that you're trying to bridge that gap and keep our patients as safe as possible in a setting that isn't always the safest place to be, then they can get behind that. Fear, when people are tense, that's when problems occur. And so we want to empower our workforce, make sure that they're involved in the solutions from the get-go, and that they are really coming up with what those processes should look like, and make sure that when we do have a bad apple, which you do when you start growing to any scale, that you have a mechanism to deal with that. But for the other 99% of the time when it's a process issue, that people feel empowered to stop to say, hey, time out here. We're in the operating room. You guys did not do your time out at the beginning. You want a nurse to be able to say to a surgeon that that's the case, and you have to have a strong med staff that's going to really back you with that and manage physician behavior, manage staff behavior to make sure that everybody's really rowing in the same direction to try to get there as quickly as possible. And then you start developing that esprit de corps where everybody realizes they're in this together, and at the end of the day, we're trying to have great outcomes for our patients, and things start happening.
Right, great. So here's a question for the group. Anyone can take it. So in 1995, Clay Christensen turned the management world upside down when he introduced this idea of disruption, making the claim that often products overserve their customers and leave incumbents vulnerable to sort of low-tech disruptors that come up from the bottom of the market. So perhaps there's this implication that quality should be compromised for innovation. My nephew watches YouTube. The quality is terrible, but it does the purpose for him. How do you guys view the trade-off between innovation and quality?
I can take a stab at it if you want. We were talking about this last night at dinner. I think there are legacy views of quality that are not as relevant anymore. Henry Ford had the old Model T, right? Any color they want as long as it's black. It's always going to be consistent. The same manufacturing line, the same assembly line, right? And that was the view of quality for a long time. And many people will still view that as quality, right? Like, this can't break, or this is done right. I think a progressive view of quality, which Baldrige really fosters, I believe, is you start with your customer and work backwards from there. So, your nephew watching YouTube, if I'm a provider of entertainment, I'm going to look at all my different demographics, and I'm going to decide which ones do I serve, which one that's our key niche, and work backwards from there. So for your nephew, that terribly pixelated, my children play Minecraft. It's like a 1980s blocky looking horrible game. They love it. If you start from your customer's perspective in Baldrige and work your way backwards and say, well, what do they want? And then what are they willing to pay for? And that's the Clay Christensen portion, right? It's not just what do they want, what are they willing to pay for? And that's what we're going to hit. That's, I think, a more progressive view of quality. And when you understand that, that's when you start thinking innovatively. Because you say, where are my customers going, or where can I lead my customers? And what are they willing to pay for along that journey? That, to me, is a more progressive view of quality than just the consistency, or we're always going to do this exactly the same way really well. It has to be, where are they going, and how do we lead that effectively and consistently? And to me, from a Baldrige perspective, that would be what I would offer.
So it's a beyond defects. It goes way beyond just eradicating defects.
Well, you think of the Ford Taurus, right? I remember a long time ago when the Ford Taurus came out, it had many, many technical innovations in it. And what was it noticed for? The cup holders. It was the first car to have a cup holder in it. That's quality to me. They were consistent, their product was well built, but it was also customer driven. And they knew customers want cup holders, which cost them nothing to add and dazzled their customers. So to me, if you start with your customers, that's a Baldrige perspective in my mind. Customers and stakeholders, and then you work your way backwards from there. That, I think, is how I would view quality, at least.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the Ritz-Carlton, I believe, is a 2-time Baldrige winner, and this podium doesn't have cup holders, so it really needs one, actually. So framework failed there, I guess.
I'd like to add something if I can.
Please, here.
I was at a National League of Cities meeting a couple months ago, actually it was in November, and I heard representatives, these were millennials, from Uber and Airbnb. And the Uber executive was talking to a group of elected officials who were primarily baby boomers, and they were very concerned about the disruptive nature of Airbnb and Uber on cities. So the mayors and the council members it was a very difficult conversation. And I remember the Uber executive said, look, we're not a taxi cab service. We're a platform. We're about enabling our customers to do something that they normally wouldn't be able to do. And so I've been thinking about, well, Uber, as it relates to cities, is reducing and trying to eliminate drunk driving and people dying on our streets. We don't think of Uber that way, right? So as cities, we think it's kind of disruptive, or Airbnb, because we may have some people who are visiting an Airbnb and they're disrupting the neighborhood, and we see that as but I think that to your point, what you made me think about is what we've been talking about in Fort Collins is how do we start reshaping our stories and our examples and the labels we use to be attractive to millennials. So, for example, what if we don't think of cities as water, sewer, police, electric, parks, things like that? But what about if we think of ourselves as platforms? So Highway 287 that goes through Fort Collins, College Avenue, Yeah, it's a road. Yeah, we got to pave it and those sorts of things, and we got to keep it up and running. But what if we start as a city, start thinking about it as a platform for Colorado State to bolt on and to do what they do? Or what about the mall, or a retailer, or what about a funeral home, or a whatever? And then we become a platform for people to add value in their lives. And so for me, I can reconcile that through the Baldrige process. And I think that it's, yes, we have to be efficient. We have to get to the 911 call within 3 minutes. We have to pave the street within X number of years. We have to, but I think that this journey that we're on is getting us to really think about citizen engagement and not just our traditional systems. Thinking about how do we do this for the next 50 years? And so I would say this framework, it's really, really gotten us to rethink our model.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting in itself. I mean, that, for those worried that Baldrige might be constraining, I mean, that's quite innovative thinking. Sharon, you've worked as a Baldrige examiner, evaluator, not sure.
Examiner in the past, yeah.
There's this concept of it's voice of the customer. Mm-hmm. Is that right? And that's, I think, what was getting to what Jeff was saying, connecting to the front line, et cetera. Can you, briefly explain to the audience that concept and how it's applied in various settings?
Well, the voice of the customer is just really what it sounds like, is you're listening to your customer. And the first thing you have to know about your customer is, who are your customers? And so in higher education, that gets to be kind of interesting. Do we consider our students to be our customers? And that could start fights in academic circles on are they customers or not. I think me personally, I always think of them just as our major stakeholder. And we are very student focused at the Montfort College of Business, and we use them up front, and we think, what does this do to our students? How does it impact them? How does it help them be better business professionals as they leave? And so I think the voice of the customer is just that, who are our customers, number one, and I think that is important. And then what do they need from us? How can we fulfill it? I think, students are, again, I'll say major stakeholders to be a little safer. Someone said that if students are customers, they're the only customers that want less for their money. But parents are out there. We know it's a big investment for parents to send their kids to college. We understand that. The employers that hire our students, that's really important. We want to make sure that anybody hires a Montfort College of Business graduate gets a really good, productive employee. And as a state institution, we also feel an obligation to the state of Colorado to provide high-quality education. And so we look at our stakeholders, and we have KPIs in our stakeholder area, and and we look at how we can best meet their needs.
So, Jerry, some of the numbers that you cited early on about your growth, your extraordinary growth, can't be achieved without customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, et cetera. I want to talk about, it's a bit of a complicated question, so give me a second, but I want to talk about the interplay between risk and customer satisfaction. So you're worried about giving out bad loans, but then you don't want to make the mortgage application process so onerous that no one ever wants to do business with you again, right? So how do you strike that balance between risk management and giving the customer what they want in a mortgage?
That's a great question, and I want to be very clear. When we doubled our capital in the last 5 years, we did that by also reducing the risk of the organization. So as a total organization, we're far less riskier than we were in 2008, and we're twice as big in terms of our capital accumulation. And a lot of that comes going back to the voice of the customer, and this is a real important point. The Baldrige framework has 7 categories: leadership, strategic planning, member focus or customer focus, employee engagement, knowledge management, all these different areas. They ask about 255 questions. And they're questions that any leader should be asking, any leader. And when it comes to customers, one of their questions might be, how do you design your products and services to meet your customers' needs? Sounds like a simple question. When you start typing it out, as we did, we realized, oh my, we really have not designed not only the product, but the delivery of that product to benefit our members. And it was that revelation that made us very clear on what we needed to do to change our processes. And in the mortgage lending process, we changed it rapidly. That was one of our earliest sectors of our business that we undertook. And we were able to reduce our turn times and the amount of burden that a consumer would go through to get a mortgage. We reduced it substantially, so much so that we were able to beat the national money center banks in that marketplace. And so we were able to deliver product quicker, better, more accurate, and beneficial, priced similarly as the large banks for the consumer. And so it really became about asking these 255 questions, and there's probably about 60 that are designed around the customer experience. Asking those questions and getting the honest answers from the staff. How can we improve that? And that's really what we did.
So I want to talk now a little bit about quality failure, about defects, et cetera. And I want to start with Kevin, because it's so profound and emotional in a clinical setting when something goes wrong. I don't know the answer to this. Does Baldrige provide any sort of guidance on what to do after a defect is discovered or an error is made? How do you handle it in terms of the organizational apology, et cetera? So this is I want to hear specifically from him, but anyone in the group, go ahead and take this.
Sounds great. Well, just to add on to what Jerry was saying, Baldrige, what it does is it makes you internally ask questions that help you improve. And so, for instance, like when we were in the thick of our Baldrige journey, there were questions around ethics. And we were like, what? Where are they going with all these different questions? So we go through and answer them, how do we audit? How do we do X, Y, and Z? And then, sure enough, Enron occurred. And so what Baldrige does is it doesn't give you the answers, but what it does is it makes you ask the questions and how you handle those questions internally to identify where your opportunities for improvement exist. And so through that process, we've come up with how do you handle situation X, Y, and Z. And many of it is just saying sorry. We made a mistake. This was something that we certainly did not mean to happen. This is what occurred, and honesty is always the best policy. So you talked a little bit about the fact that doctors are worried about getting sued and hospitals are worried about getting sued in litigation. That's the business we're in. So oftentimes that transparency of sharing with the family exactly what happened is exactly what they need to hear. Depending on how that physician or how that staff member handles that event, really sets the stage for how things are going to end. And so we've taken the approach that complete and total honesty and transparency is key in all of those situations. Plus, following up, most of our families, they want to know that this isn't going to happen to another patient. And so we have a root cause analysis. We go through a process of analyzing exactly why did all of the holes in the Swiss cheese line up and this occurred, and then take steps to make sure that it will never happen again, but also sharing that throughout an organization. So when you get large and complex and you have different departments working, doing different things, you got to get the word out and share those stories in a manner that people don't feel like they're being picked on, but that it's a learning opportunity for the entire organization so that this event never happens again. And if we could take that thinking throughout the whole healthcare industry, we'd all be better off, because it takes about 7 years for a best practice to get disseminated out throughout the entire industry. And in that time, lives are being lost. And so I think Baldrige provides a framework that could be really the platform that the healthcare industry could build upon to save lives throughout the entire United States. But we got to focus locally to make an impact globally. So.
Right. Yeah. I saw some epidemiologists at Hopkins now rate preventable medical errors as the third leading cause of death in the United States. So it gives you an idea of and then not to mention the $1 trillion of waste in healthcare, et cetera. There's plenty of opportunity for quality improvement, for sure.
Huge opportunities, no question.
Does anyone else want to talk about post sort of quality failure or apology and what that means in your context?
I guess I'll just share a couple thoughts. I think that as Kevin was talking, I was thinking about my level of understanding and appreciation for some of the operations within the city of Fort Collins pre-Baldrige versus as we've been going through these 200 plus questions, and that's hard work. I mean, half of this head is white because of a lot. This is not easy. But I just think about a systematic approach to that. When you're asking questions, when you go through this process, you also know when your team is bluffing or when you're making up an answer. And when that's an important question about ethics or an important question about customer or workforce engagement, and you write that down, as you know, Jerry said, you're doing this. It's disingenuous, and to me, it feels like you're breaking a promise to your customers if or your board of directors. One of my council members is here right now, and one of Jerry's board members. We share a board member, and I think that as you're what I really appreciate is through these questions, you're getting to know your organization. You're knowing when you're making things up. You know when you don't have a process, and then you have to prioritize which one of those questions that you're bluffing on do you have to work on, and they turn into opportunities for improvement. For us, one thing I think about is, one of the very first years we went through the Rocky Mountain Performance Excellence Program, one of our opportunities for improvements was our lack of strategic planning, and that's a big giant OFI. I mean, I like your stories, Kevin, about 20% and then 10%. You do at the beginning, you feel like you're taking steps backwards, but it's moving slow to move fast. And so I guess, I think when you're asking about apologies, it's being authentic. It's knowing, and it's not only apologizing to a family who you just hurt, but it's apologizing to a coworker who you've made a mistake. I implemented a performance-based pay system that took me 6 years to realize that it was an anchor for our workforce. And I was, in a big way, personally responsible for that system because the engineer in me came out and what I realized after 6 years was that it was, and everyone had been telling me that, but after 6 years, said to the organization, it helped us move forward, but it was not, it was a misfit for our culture. And I don't think I would have been able to say that without having gone through this process. And then finally, yeah, we specifically use the PDCA model, the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, right? Prior to Baldrige, we just kind of winged it. And we were a trust us local government. Trust us, you give us your fees, tax, fines, charges, trust us, we'll do a good job. Fort Collins was very well run for the first 100 years. But now I think it's more systematic. I think it's more authentic. I think it's more productive. And certainly, I think our community members have a chance to help co-create their community versus us sort of patting them on the head. So that, in a big way, for us to use language like that, I think is saying, we need to improve at this. You deserve a better local government. That's a big apology.
Yeah. I'm always astounded at, when my wife and I go out for dinner and there's some little mess up with the order and then they bring the free dessert. I leave so much happier than I would have been if there hadn't been. I'm always like, how did they do that? But it's true. It's an opportunity. An apology is an opportunity, which is interesting. Yeah.
Kevin, can I chime in just for a second there? I think, Kevin, you touched on something, and Jerry, you did earlier, that I thought would be really good just to make sure that everybody in the room was kind of clear on what we're talking about. So, you asked the question, does Baldrige tell you how to say sorry or how to fix things? And Kevin's response was not really. And as an examiner, like Sharon, I was an examiner for a while as well, you're not looking for, how do they do this? You're looking for, in other words, you're not saying this approach is better than that approach. You're just saying, have they thought through it and does it work, and do they have results that show that? But just for everybody in the room to be clear, Baldrige is kind of a holistic way that you run your organization. That's a way to look at Baldrige. But then you say, okay, well, how do we prevent defects or drive these initiatives, or how do we fix what you'll hear most Baldrige organizations say is they'll say, we use Baldrige to drive our organization holistically. To drive change and improvement, we'll use Lean or Six Sigma or some proprietary thing that they're doing on their own, right? Whether it's just Plan, Do, Study, Act or Plan, Do, Check, Act. But they'll have, maybe A3. They'll have these different, this is how we do change. Baldrige is the overall, are we effective according to stakeholders, customers, employees, all these different, is that fair to say? I just think for everybody to know that Baldrige is not the thing that you say, this is how we're going to drive our initiative. Baldrige is how you say, are we effective overall and where do we need to look at? Is that what you guys would say as well, Sharon?
Yeah.
Just to kind of tag on to that, so early in our Baldrige process, we'd ask that question, and then we'd come up with some cute anecdote or some story that we thought answered that question, which was not even what they were asking us. And it sounded good. It sounded good and it felt good, but then what's beautiful about the Baldrige process is that if you move on to a certain level, they come on site and they actually make sure that you do what you say you do. And holy cow, did we get creamed the first time that we had the Baldrige crew come on site, because it's not about cute anecdotes. It's about truly what do you do and how do you answer these questions and how thoughtful are you about that. But just to add on to that, they're not looking for specific things that you're doing. They're looking that you took it, you really know how you answer that question, what the process is behind it, and that you do it consistently. So we said we do PDCA for everything. The first time they came on site, we couldn't demonstrate that we did PDCA on anything. And so, then we go back and say, okay, well, there's, just do it's, and then there's, we dive into deeper process improvement efforts in certain areas, and it wasn't, we got so tired of the site visits after a while that finally we were a recipient when we were over it, and we actually did what we said we would do in the application. And so we did zero prep for the site visit. We said, they're going to come in, we're going to get our feedback report, we're going to improve upon that, and lo and behold, that's when we actually had started to do what we said we did in that application, and we were a recipient. And that was, but it wasn't until it became authentic and not just talk. It was actually the way we do business.
There's really two attributes I'm hearing here, and we experience the same thing. You have to be willing to be humbled, and you have to persevere, and it takes both of those. You have to be willing to accept the constructive criticism and say, yes, we can do better, we know we can, and persevere through that. And it's really that perseverance that I think helps an organization endure and become better for its constituents.
Right.
If I can
trough of disillusionment, as it were.
Yeah.
And our experience is really with the REMPEX examiners, so not the national examiners yet. We're in that process right now, but I think what I really appreciated about the outside independent objective review of our organization and what we say we do and they're verifying was that it wasn't a gotcha. I didn't feel like it was ever, you have the wrong answer. It was always, we are here to help you get better. Mm-hmm. We're here to ask questions that you may not see, or you may have blinders on, or whatever. And that outside independent review for me has been tremendous. And it is, for some folks, I think it is threatening. And for me, I look at it and say, to help us get better.
Bring it on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that, I think, is a great benefit, having gone through this process, is we have a team of folks coming on, like Adam, who was mentioned, and others, and you had one of your colleagues, Jerry, was on that team, and I felt like they were there because they wanted to help the city of Fort Collins get really, really good and crystal clear what we were about, so it's been huge.
That's a tough act to follow. So those guys have already proved and been successful at or many of the things we're trying to do at the state. You know, the Baldrige Award really has become the symbol that you know, continuous improvement and measuring, collecting data, measuring the right things, setting goals, using dashboards actually works. It pays dividends. It sounds absurd, but I'm old enough, not bragging, you get a certain perspective when you get, let's just say, on the right side of 60. And I can remember back when there was a lot of skepticism that even in business, that kind of measurement of really what you're trying to get to and going through the process of understanding your mission deeply enough to really reevaluate what you are measuring, that wasn't always given as the way business should work. And certainly in the last 10 years where we've begun to try and look at doing that in government, the skepticism has been an order of magnitude greater for obvious reasons, right? There are certain filters about the people that go to work in public service and government, and oftentimes they are very risk adverse. Oftentimes the system is somewhat rigged to encourage, you know, in other words, they'll get no credit if they take risk and they succeed. There's very few avenues by which they get recognized and celebrated by taking that risk and succeeding. And yet, if they take the risk and fail, there are sometimes quite harsh penalties in terms of how the press, how the media will deal with that. You know, I don't know how I got conned into this, but I wrote my memoir. I'm on the right side of 60, but I'm still, I think, way too young to have written a memoir. But it came out a few weeks ago called The Opposite of Woe. And at one point we talked about, and it is great, the one great thing is you go back over your whole life and you not just examine relationships, but you remember some of these things. And we opened the Wine Coop Brewing Company in 1988. I'd been a geologist and gotten laid off. The whole company was sold and everyone got laid off. And I had this notion to open a brew pub there. No one had ever seen a brew pub. There weren't any brew pubs before. There was saw one in California, there was one on the East Coast and one outside Chicago. But we didn't have any money. So and I was a geologist, so I had to go to the library, get out a book on how to write a business plan, do all this stuff, try and raise money, and we were just very undercapitalized. And so I was buying all the kitchen equipment, everything used, and I had a buddy who was tearing down an old mansion on the edge of Cheeseman Park, on the north edge of Cheeseman Park. This mansion had been abandoned for 15 years. And he said there were some beautiful Victorian toilet fixtures that I could get, and he charged me, if I'd go take them out myself, he'd give them to me for 20 bucks. I said, great, that's it. I took a couple of these young kids who wanted to be bartenders, and we went out there with wrenches and got out there, but homeless people had broken into this mansion and had, as long as they could, used these toilets, which is to say, but there's no water, so they didn't flush. They just filled. So, and the only way you can really take a toilet out is you have to kind of get down there and cradle it with the wrench. And there's a pretty strong, but they'd been abandoned for a number of years, so there was a thick crust. It wasn't unbearable. Have you guys all eaten yet? I just want to make sure. There is a point to this story. We took these toilets out, there were 6 of them, and put them in the back of this old beat-up station wagon I was using like a pickup truck, and went down to a car wash, an outside car wash. And the crust was so thick you had to break through it to be able to then use the car wash to actually clean the toilets. And in the end, they turned out to be spectacular and great, useful parts. And you know, we saved $1,000, which was a huge amount of money then. In the book I wrote, in a few years as governor, I would learn that legislative politics on a statewide level is not unlike whacking away at layers of crap to get something awful or something useful. And whacking away at layers of crap to get something useful is often when you're really trying to take performance metrics and put them into government, it really is. It is a struggle at the beginning, We have my budget director is a guy named Henry Sobenet, a Republican, worked in the budget office under Bill Owens, was at the end a budget director there, and he's really agnostic. I mean, he's been a Republican his whole life. That's just because he hasn't really seen the light yet. Just kidding, not trying to cause a ruckus. And he really has created an institute by which we really are taking not just the senior staff in each agency, but the next level and then the next level below that, and really building a sense of what do lean performance measures look like, how are they relevant in state government, how do we figure out ways to reward and recognize and celebrate people that are willing to take some of the risks and set, hard goals, right? Goals will be difficult to reach. We came out a year ago. We said by the end of this year, we're going to cut the average wait time when you go out to the Department of Motor Vehicles from 55 minutes, and we're going to cut it to 15, and those guys are going to cut it to, their goal is to cut it to 10, right? Now, it's going to be very hard. Some within the agency said almost impossible, but we're motivating them, and trust me, if they get there, they're going to be heroes in the entire state government. They will be recognized and celebrated in a way that few people ever have. But just to get them to that point where this is, where they are all investing themselves in that was a challenge. And I think part of, Colorado's on a roll right now. You guys are all aware of this. I mean, #1 place to live, #2 fastest growing economy. #2 in startup density. I mean, you go down almost every level over the last 5 or 6 years. Colorado's kind of come into its own. And part of that is, I think, that we have focused on good government. We have Joe Neguse, who's now the head of the Office of Regulatory Affairs, and he's the second person working on this, but all he does every day is go through each different industry and say, all right, how do we cut the regulations and either eliminate regulations or dramatically simplify regulations, and do that in concert with the industry, right? So that we are still making sure that we're not leaving the public vulnerable to, ruthless or unethical practices. And that constant effort to not just reduce regulations, but to make the whole state government more pro-business, and to talk about it at every single meeting, everywhere we are, that we are partners with our business. We are not trying to punish anyone. We want them to grow. That I tell the state workers that their ability to get a raise, they have not had a raise above inflation in about 11 years, right? And half those years they've had no raise. So if on a cumulative basis, they are probably about 5 or 6% behind inflation over the last 10 years. I tell them, your goal, your effort, your ability to get a real raise is going to be dependent upon how strong this economy does. And I think they get that. We've also been looking at some of the international trade stuff. We've done, I just got back from 4 days in Brazil, and I would argue to the private sector, I know you're not all private sector, but in the private sector world, this is a great time to look at countries that have had 2 or 3 years of hard times, but I think are processing through their political issues, and I think that is there are 200 million people in Brazil. It is a strong democracy. There is a strong media there. They've got too many political parties. They have 30 political parties that have to all be balanced out to make sure that their president can do anything. But we've been taking trips to Turkey, to Israel, to China, to Japan, and trying to build those bridges, because long term, that is how we're going to get more money, not just for state employees, but to have the entire economy grow and be able to take advantage of the strong dollar and look at what a successful, Colorado has long been more of an isolated economy. We do some exporting, but really become more of an international player and export more products outside the state. One of the challenges that we've had with all this success, and this again applies to every employer, is making sure that we have the talent pipeline sufficiently full that people can find the quality of employees that they need. And we've taken on a bunch of issues. It's interesting, and again, going back and thinking about the memoir, 40 years ago, you go back and read some of the media, this country decided that we were going to make a real push and that the future was going to belong to people with college degrees, and we needed more people with college degrees. 40 years ago, we only had 29% of our population actually got a 4-year diploma. So, as you all know, we made this a huge priority. You know, measure it, put billions, hundreds of billions of dollars over 40 years. You know what the percentage is now? 30.5. So we've spent 40 years, and in this process, made it unfashionable for people to become plumbers or welders, for people to, you know, have lower level non-college degree type jobs. We've looked at that and said, all right, we're going to change that. So over the last several years, we have done several things. We have what we call concurrent enrollment, because tied right into that is all the kids that are, those extra 1.5% of kids that are coming out of college, oftentimes have huge debt. I have an executive assistant. She has a master's in photojournalism. Right, not exactly the most useful degree right now. She is 37, just had her second child, and has $80,000 in debt. Right? It's just, and I asked her, who was advising you, right? I mean, how could this possibly happen? There was no one advising her. No one, right? And she is not unique, unfortunately. But concurrent enrollment allows kids while they're still in high school to take community college courses. And more importantly, we've been working with the Markle Foundation in New York and LinkedIn to be able to, we're creating, there's a website called Skillful. And now it's just been up for 3 months. It's in its rudimentary state. But once it's really filled out, kids will be able to click on every community college or workforce training center class and see not just what's in the curriculum, but see what skills they'll get once they complete, what will their competency be. And then they click on those skills, they'll see what kind of jobs that prepares them for. They click on the jobs, and it'll show them who's hiring and what they're paying. Now we're tying that into a software system that we've done in partnership with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and USA Funds. It's called Launch My Career. And that ties in, and basically that allows kids to look at community college degrees or 4-year college degrees and look at what do you make, assuming you complete this degree and you've got a job, what's the average you're going to make over your first 5 years, and what's the average over the last 5 years, and then, depending on how much debt you have, when are you going to be able to own a house relative to each of the markets that you're in. So kids are going to be able to get online when they're 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 and begin to take real responsibility for their career, for what are they really looking to get out of these classes. The Skillful website, again, this partnership with LinkedIn, allows, and LinkedIn's been great on this, allows them to also have a living resume. So every kid, no matter whether that's a community college class or they go work at Walmart and they take the 9-month class in inventory analysis, so they get a badge or a certificate. Each badge, each certificate, each class, degree, whatever, follows them at their choice, but they create a living resume so that employers can look and see exactly what are the skills that an individual has, and then can actually just click on that individual and say, hey, here's my company, here's what I do. I'm just sending you an email to let you know that we're often in the market for someone who has your skills, and we'd love to talk sometime. We've taken that software approach and said, all right, what's the next step there that, again, is going to allow us to get more of these kids, 70% of our kids who are never going to get a 4-year degree, and we have, in many cases, a real lapse of a lack in having the right training, the right skills for the jobs we do have. So there's a guy named Noel Ginsberg. He has a company called Intertech Plastic, injection molding company. I think it's $40 million a year. For the last 3 years, he's been volunteering his time, because obviously his company is doing well and he can afford it. God bless him. But he has created something called the Bell Commission, or helped us create something called the Bell Commission, Business Experiential Learning, and then BASIC, which is Business and Schools in Collaboration. They work together, and he took about 50 civic leaders to Switzerland in January, and I spent all 4 days, and this is from 7 or 7:30 in the morning, we'd go till 11 o'clock at night, looking at their apprenticeship system. And we're going to have a different system, but we're going to scale in this state the ability to allow kids for their junior year in high school to decide they want to go to work. and they can go work 3 days, and then the other 2 days they'll go to a community college, they'll go back to their high school, or they'll go to a workforce training center, and their curriculum that they get in those 2 days in school is going to be directed, and in many cases we hope it's going to be designed by the industry in which they're working. And we're not just talking about trades, plumbing and welding. We're talking about banking, insurance, tech, aerospace. In Switzerland, we went to I can't even describe, advanced manufacturing. The CEO of UBS Bank, which is the largest bank in Europe right now, Swiss bank, he was an apprentice, right? Didn't finally get his 4-year college degree until he was 28, right? But in their culture, there's no prejudice against people that choose not to go to college right out of high school or in the middle of it. And so we've been doing this for a year now. We've had tremendous response. We're looking for other organizations, healthcare organizations, college education, or educational institutions, just because I know you're in the audience. We think when we take the LinkedIn, the Skillful website, and we tie that to this notion of having apprenticeships that are ongoing, that it really, when we scale that, it's going to apply to the 45 and the 50 and the 55-year-old people that have lost not just a job, but have lost whole careers to technology, innovation, and all this disruption. And if you step back and look at, why is there this embrace of not just Donald Trump, but also Bernie Sanders, I think a lot of it is we've had, for 10 or 15 years, we've had a huge number of people that have no raise. In many cases, they've lost their jobs in their whole careers. They're working for a third or a half of what they used to make. And that is incredibly frustrating and debilitating and makes people angry. And let me tell you, as someone who spent 16 years in the restaurant business, anger is a communicable disease, right? In other words, emotions travel. And if you look at how many people have been so underemployed, this happened in the 1920s when we electrified factories. The last great time of job upheaval, and it wasn't just electrification of factories, but it was also the assembly line, all the innovations that follow any big technology advancements. This is the same kind of thing. And we look at, so Colorado is one of the top cyber employer locations in the countries. We have Spacecom down in Colorado Springs has the primary responsibility for cybersecurity with the military. Because of that, there are now over 85 private companies in Colorado Springs about cybersecurity. Trust me, this is something that's not going to go away. Hopefully, Colorado's going to be we're going to own this. We're going to be one of the top 2 or 3 states in the country. But right now, we have almost 5,000 job openings around cybersecurity. 2/3 of them, you don't need a master's or a PhD. You don't even need a college degree. You need about 9 months. You need coding. You need certain skills. Well, what are those skills? If we wanted to pick out who are the people we'd put into that 9-month class to get a cybersecurity job that starts at $50,000, $55,000, well, they need to be numerate. They have to have a high sense of precision. They've got to have a sense of urgency. They've got to be able to collaborate, because now almost all of these tech companies, the work is done in teams. If you look at bank tellers, we've lost about half the bank tellers we used to have, 10 or 15 years ago. Again, technology is just, we don't need as many bank tellers. What are their skills? If we looked on a Skillful website, what were their skills? They have to be numerate, high sense of precision, have to have a sense of urgency, and they have to be able to collaborate. They have to have a great customer service. It's the same, almost an identical set of skills. Now, is every bank teller going to be able to transition into a cybersecurity job? I don't know, but I'll bet a lot of them can. And we have been woefully unable to do that. We have not been able to adapt and use technology to translate. As we lose whole industries or careers, how do we get them into these new ones that are emerging very rapidly? And I think hopefully, I think Colorado is going to be known. This is going to be something, once we scale this, and we just got $5.5 million grant from the Michael Bloomberg Foundation for the apprenticeship program. The Markle Foundation committed another $8 million to this Skillful partnership and the website. And in many ways, what this looks like is exactly what all of you have been doing, right? Is using innovative ways of thinking trying to set new goals and new standards that sometimes seem unreachable. And maybe they are unreachable, but by pushing ourselves, I think certainly in this case, we'll take the state so much further and so much more rapidly than we would by our more traditional goal-setting approaches, that the end result is going to be, I think we'll have a lot more people working in jobs that they like and are finding their jobs, their lives given back to them. So we'll have a happier state. I think we're going to have many, many more successful companies. And I think we're going to brand the state as a place that does things in a different way, and actually, instead of just talking about problems, is actually able to solve them. So in that sense, I think that all three of those things directly apply to the work you're doing. So I love the fact that we have 4 Baldrige organizations, they're not companies, but enterprises in Colorado. I brag about it to other states. You have no idea how competitive governors are. But anyway, I do as a governor get to, on appropriate occasions, and this is such an occasion, I get to say on behalf of the entire state of Colorado, we thank you all for all that you've done and all that you still will do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. What a nice note to end on. Take your time. The panelists will be around. REMPEX is in the back to answer any questions. And thank you all for being such a lovely audience. Thank you.